Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Safety Action December update. And I'm Gary Rowe, the CEO of Safety Action. I may have one or more of my colleagues join me, but they're out of the office at the moment and may join in remotely. But let's get on to what we'd like to share with you this morning. And we'd like to keep it within 20 minutes or half hour, so it's nice and convenient, possibly over morning tea for you. So we've got quite a bit I'd like to share with you today. One, working near deep water. And what is deep water? Can we give away old equipment? Do electric e-bikes provide more exercise than pedal bikes? A very interesting case from New Zealand, where the police have used the proceeds of crime in relation to a workplace safety issue. So we'll look at that and I'll share that with you. Another case, asking workers if there are any risks was shown to be inadequate by the courts. And a perennial one that comes up, particularly this time of year, is does wearing safety glasses all day potentially harm your eyesight? And remember, coming into this sort of weather, we're probably wearing more sunglasses as well, and often plastic lenses. So before we look at our first topic, a question of the week. If a low tree branch hangs over from your neighbour's property, are you allowed to cut it off? We're going to come back at the end of the session and come back to this question. And we've got two questions this week. In Australian standards, they use the terms may and the word must. And many people think and believe that the word must items are a legal requirement and therefore mandatory. Is that correct? We'll come back to the answers to both of those questions at the end of this session. So let's just have a look at deep water. So firstly, before we actually look at what the definition of deep water is, particularly in relation to workplace safety, I find that sometimes people miss the point of what the real danger of deep water is. For example, there was a case some years ago in Victoria where I recall the lawyers and prosecution were arguing over some time and debate over whether somebody had a heart attack, fell in a puddle at a construction site and then drowned, or did he fall in the water, was drowning, and then actually drown. So these are the some of the issues that come up. And of course, the real risk of deep water is drowning. If somebody falls in a puddle or collapses for any reason, they need immediate resuscitation and first aid. That, I think, is a separate issue. So what is deep water? In relation to the workplace, we have high-risk construction work, talks about construction work adjacent to water and drowning risk, but it doesn't actually specify what constitutes that drowning risk, i.e. the depth of water. So we look to general building regulations, and we have swimming pools. And my understanding is that they're typically around Australia specified as swimming pools or spas deeper than 300 millimetres. So that's not much. So bear with me, maybe about 3 months showing my hands. And particularly because we would have around homes and swimming pools young children who can't swim and probably don't know the rules and safety precautions around water. You may have frail people and elderly. And so 300 mil is not much. In a workplace, if you're a fit, healthy adult and you fall in a puddle or some pit with 300 mils of water, most people will typically stand up and walk out safely. So 300 mil in itself in a workplace doesn't constitute a significant risk of drowning, and therefore probably doesn't meet our criteria of deep water. So what I'm about to share with you, I think, is our view of what constitutes deep water, but it's a good starting point because in the absence of clear regulations or guidance. So we believe water-filled dams, ponds, or tanks with steep sides, so therefore it's difficult to get out if somebody falls in, and they're at foot level where you can walk up to the edge of those bodies of water that are deeper than 1 metre. And why have we gone for higher than 300 mil? Because we think a fit, healthy adult who falls in 1 metre of water in normal, reasonable circumstances, would stand up and wade out of the water. And so that in itself is not posing a serious risk of drowning. So we think there's a good starting point. However, you may have mechanical risks like mixing equipment inside a tank, and that poses a mechanical hazard. Some tanks and pits aerate the water and they become low buoyancy. The water actually may not be water, but chemicals, corrosive acids, or other harmful substances. So here we're talking about primarily the hazard of water, I think largely clean water, and the depth of it being a drowning risk. So obviously you'll want to do a risk assessment, and so bear with me. And I think the key precautions that probably come out of this is, if where possible, fence deep water. So particularly if it has steep sides on it, you'll notice around the countryside, most rivers, oceans at the beach, most dams on farms and properties are not fenced. So once again, our definition, remember, was approaching at a foot level, their steep sides, and greater than 1 metre deep in the workplace is our definition of deep water, what we think is a good starting point. So if you've got those conditions, if we can fence it, we will. So now we've actually made essentially the area safe, and we don't come to the question, at least not yet, do I need to wear a life jacket near this deep water? Well, if it's fenced off, no. No working alone, because what we want is if someone does go in the water, fall in the water, that they can call for help or rescue them. You need a water response plan and possibly a kit, which is the life ring, rope, or whatever it is that may be there. You see this on many piers and jetties, which is just a standard precaution to throw over to someone who may have fallen in the water. I've mentioned, consider the other hazards that may be there, which is low buoyancy. Is it indeed fresh water, or is it some chemicals that have their own chemical hazards? And finally, you probably come to where many people started, or I see in many company procedures, wear life jackets near deep water. We would mandate that if you're working from a boat, or possibly like on a pier or structure over deep water, would be certainly the minimum requirement. You may have others. So there we go. That's our view of deep water. Remember, it's not prescribed specifically in the workplace safety regulations. So it means that we have the flexibility, and you have the flexibility to do a risk assessment for your circumstances, and you may adopt something different or similar. Just a little reminder for your diary for next year. Hopefully you've started to look for events into 2025. We'd like you to just pencil in the 5th of February, safety planning. So we think looking at your strategic safety plan for your business, and in fact your safety business plan, which is for the year, which is a budgeted, solid plan that you're going to deliver for the business. It's going to be relatively short. It's short and punchy. We'll provide you with some nice checklists and succinct information, and over a light lunch. So we think that might be of interest for those that can get out the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne on the 5th of February. We'd love to see you. Put that in your diary. In January, and the Feb newsletter will have bookings, although you can certainly email us and phone anytime to reserve a place for that session. So coming to the question, can we give away old equipment? And of course, I think you'll appreciate the answer is yes. But in relation to the workplace, under the workplace safety regulations, not only in Victoria, but in the WHS in other states, whoever gives away equipment and machinery in the workplace to a workplace, from a workplace into workplaces, you become the supplier. You take on the supplier obligations. So what do you need to do? You first need to understand, are you giving it away as scrap and you don't intend it to be used as the machine that it originally was, in which case you mark it as scrap and no other requirements are needed, because you don't have to do a risk assessment or make it safe to give to somebody, because your intention and that of the receiver is that it's only going to be used for parts and or scrap metal. If it's intended to be used, you need to do a risk assessment and advise the person you're giving it to, either fix it and bring it up to standard, or in writing provide the person you're giving this equipment away to the advice of a copy of the risk assessment and or specific things they need to do to make it safe and compliant before they put it into use. And excuse me, and there was an interesting case study that we've mentioned in our newsletter on this, where I think a well-intentioned business in Queensland donated a scissor lift to a local school, and unfortunately the scissor lift had faults. Those faults caused the scissor lift to overturn while it was in use. It sped up, overturned, and tragically one of the workers at the school was killed. And the firm who gave the equipment away in good faith and without knowledge or thinking that that would create a risk was fined $40,000. I think a relatively, in this, low fine in relation to a fatality in this day and age. I'm presuming the court took into account the good intentions of the company. I would have thought if there was serious gross negligence today and it causes a fatality, it's going to be over 400,000 and possibly closer to $1 million or more as in a fine. So I think that reflects that. But the case study still shows what can happen even when you act in good faith and think you're doing a great thing for the community, a local school, or for somebody in need of that equipment. So let's turn our mind to electric bikes. So bear with me, one of my hobbies, I try and ride a pedal bike every day after work if I can. If the weather's nice and I get away from work and time, I only like to ride in the daylight hours. And I saw this article that electric e-bikes, it was suggested, may give more exercise. So obviously that piqued my interest. So I think I'm doing it for enjoyment and exercise. So my thought was surely pedal bikes give more exercise. So let's have a quick look at what I came across in the article. And I think it makes sense. My brother and a number of other friends have e-bikes and they ride them a lot. So listen to this. E-bikers take longer rides. And I typically only ride about 20 kilometres a day on my regular route. And my brother would typically, on an e-bike, I know he tells me occasionally, does typically about 40 kilometre rides. So he's doing twice as far, albeit with an e-bike. The data also shows e-bikers tend to ride more often. So it's convenient and easy and not stressful and you're not getting too sweaty. So they tend to go out there more than those with traditional pedal bikes. And e-bikers are prepared to tackle tougher terrain, more hilly areas, because the battery and the motor will carry them up the steepest bits, which is what actually gives the most strain, obviously, for people on pedal bikes. So they said on average, yes, we know it's easier for people with electric motors and batteries on e-bikes, but on average, owning an e-bike and using it the way they describe, which is what most people do, or many do, will actually give you more exercise than a pedal bike. I'm keeping that in mind, but at the moment, I'm sticking to my pedal bike. We'll see how we go. Now, a very interesting case from New Zealand. This is, to our knowledge, the first novel use of the proceeds of crime laws directly in relation to workplace safety. So an owner of a business had breached the safety laws, which are very similar in New Zealand. They picked up essentially the WHS Act and regs out of Australia. They've obviously got them localised, but the essence of it, the core of it is the same. A business and owner had been prosecuted, and indeed some of the breaches were significant and ongoing, and the owner was sentenced to 4 months home detention. Now, I don't know about you, but 4 months home detention for some people might be a bit of a holiday. So it might be a bit of a relief. However, this was part of the punishment for the company and that of the owner in this case. Apparently, the police got involved. I don't know whether they're invited to be involved or whether they've taken this up themselves. Others here of our readers and listeners today might know more about this. I've only got the article that I came across that outlined this. And so the police allege the business knowingly and continue to operate in breach of not only the laws, but also WorkSafe notices that have been served on the company. And they continue to operate in breach to save time and money. And therefore, the police concluded the company was benefiting from the proceeds of crime by breaking the law and not fulfilling and acting on the WorkSafe notices. They obtained a High Court order and they seized all of the assets of the business and the owner, including the owner's home, his holiday home, and his business. So he was completely shut down, and he was forced to negotiate and settle a $4 million settlement to actually get his business and his home back, as I understand it. So I don't know all the details of the settlement, but we do know that that's a substantial increase in penalty over what had been served on the owner and the company prior to that. And the previous penalties did not change the business. They continued to operate in contravention. So I think that's a very interesting case, may be part of the future, even here in Australia, for those recalcitrant companies. I don't think there's very many of them out there, but the few that are, that simply don't get it and don't respond to providing reasonable safety and reasonable compliance, may well have an action like this taken. So the proceeds of crime, because you're operating in breach of the law, there's a reason you're doing that. You think it'll cost too much money, or it's quicker or easier to operate without full compliance with the workplace safety laws. So I think another very interesting case that we've come across of recent times. And I saw this heading that asking workers if there are any risks is inadequate. And this is not my words. This came from the judge of a case. They were bridge builders. I can mention because their case has been published. Saunders Civibuild Proprietary Limited. They were fined $300,000, and in evidence, it was shown that there was a gap in the safety mesh beneath where workers were working. The supervisor had asked the workers, is the safety mesh and other safety precautions adequate? And we believe, as was told in the court, that the workers had responded positively, that everything was okay, they had no problems. However, later on, the judge observed and concluded that the supervisor should have personally inspected the safety netting and not have over-relied simply on the feedback of the workers. So this is reinforcing, I think, what many of us know. The role of a supervisor is not just to ask and hear that everyone is happy. The role of the supervisor is not just to coordinate the work and to get efficient work done in the business, but to ensure it's done safely and compliant. And you can't ensure it's safe and compliant if you're relying on second-hand information. So a frontline supervisor is meant to be there, go and look and see themselves. And it may only be cursory, at least a walk around would have told the supervisor in this case that there was inadequacy in the safety netting. And tragically in this case, one of the workers later fell through the gap in the safety netting. So there's just another interesting little point, particularly about supervisors. And I wonder whether all of the supervisors in your businesses, for those listening now, do they really understand this? You say, oh, yeah, we're told them they've got a duty of care. I'm not sure they still understand, but maybe this example, if you give it to them, might actually highlight for them and bring it into real life. So, does wearing safety glasses all day really harm your eyesight? So clearly the criticism is here that most safety glasses are plastic lenses as opposed to glass that was traditionally in people with poor eyesight or some vision defects. So I wear vision glasses for vision, so I'm short-sighted, and I wear them all the time because that's what short-sighted is. Long-sighted people probably only need to wear them for reading, so when they've got close-up work. So I wear glasses all day, and what I've noticed is that the whole industry is essentially moved from glass. Almost all lenses are plastic these days anyway. But this has come out of this traditional view when of poor quality safety glasses that had maybe distorted the image, were uncomfortable, particularly around the ears and the bridge of the nose. And the thought grew that these plastic lenses and their distortion of the image and poor optical quality is going to hurt and harm my eyesight. So what's the real answer to this? And what would be your answer if some of your workers pose this to you today, that you're requiring them to wear safety glasses for certain jobs? So number one, the Australian standards, and there's two key ones that I can quote you here, is AS 1337 and 1338, which relate to the standards for safety eyewear, state specifically long-term use of safety glasses which meet the standards and are fitted correctly will not harm or weaken eyesight. So this is a pretty categoric statement. It's not ambiguous that it may not cause harm. So yes, it might distort images right now if that were true, although I think many good quality safety glasses these days do not do that. And the proof of wearing plastic lenses that don't hurt your eyes or harm them, outside of work, you and I and most people, particularly coming into summer, we're probably going to wear sunglasses outdoors all weekend and all summer holidays. And no one complains about that. And they're very similar, if they're good quality safety glasses, should be the same as your comfortable sunglasses. So if we do learn anything from this, number one, you have an answer for people who may say to you, we don't want to wear safety glass all day or we can't because it's causing harm. So there's their retort and response to our safety policy. And you can also then relate to them, but look, you're wearing safety glasses, driving home, driving to work all weekend and all summer holidays. And that's not causing you a problem. And they're plastic lenses. So, and I believe all good quality safety glasses that meet those Australian standards will not distort the images, certainly not significantly, and will not cause harm. So I think you've got a pretty categoric answer for any of your team that might raise that with you. And they may have good reason to believe it. So I don't think it's a matter of criticising them, but you've now got the answer and you can talk that through with them. So as we come to the end, let's just return to our two initial questions. If there's a low tree branch hangs over from your neighbour's property, are you allowed to cut it off? Now, I haven't done any independent research on this, but I do remember from many years ago, a lawyer on ABC radio was asked this, and the answer was, yes, you can cut it off if it's overhanging your property, but you can't keep the branch because that would be theft. So you have to give the branch back. So most people might throw the branch back over the neighbour's property, or at least talk to the neighbour, whether you're going to put it in your green waste bin or recycle bin or whatever. So yes, you can, but you're not allowed to keep the branch technically, although I don't think too many neighbours would worry about possession of the branch. But my understanding is, yes, you can, but technically you can't take possession of that branch. You've got to give it back to them. So I think most neighbours aren't going to worry too much about that. So Australian standards, when I started in the safety industry as the safety engineer for the Department of Agriculture, I started reading a lot more Australian standards. And I noticed the term, you know, may this, may that, and must do certain things. And I assumed the must related to legal requirements, and therefore these requirements became mandatory. And you'll hear at the moment, there's some scaremongering going on with racking suppliers, telling customers that only rack suppliers can do the formal annual inspection of racking, because that's what the Australian says. And so let's go backtrack from that and let's just have a look. So number one, Australian standards are not law. I repeat, Australian standards are not law in any jurisdiction. They are not regulation, so therefore they are never mandatory, never. What they provide is guidance on safety and compliance. And so by providing guidance, what that means is if something's in an Australian standard, whether it is may or must, it doesn't matter. It just means a business has a choice. You can do a risk assessment and choose to do something different to an Australian standard. What you would have is a legal obligation to ensure that you're as safe, if not safer, than the way outlined in the standard. And so I'm not against Australian standards. You need to understand they are excellent. They provide good guidance on many, many topics, and we seek them out and use them where appropriate. But don't use them incorrectly. So may and must words only relate to if you want to claim you are operating, so your ladder complies with Australian standards, then the manufacturer of that ladder had to apply all of the must items in the construction, design and manufacture of that ladder. So when you see may and must, it just means may is optional to claim that you're in compliance with the standard. The must items, if you want to claim you're in full compliance with the standard, you had to have done all of the must. But that does not relate to the safety regulations. The legal requirement for, let's use ladders or racking, the legal requirement for ladders and racking is not that they comply with the Australian standard, is that they are safe. And if they're safe, you cannot be prosecuted. So let's get this clear. What we want is safe tools and equipment, safe workplaces. That's what you've got to have. Standards provide you guidance. And if the minister wanted them to be absolute and mandatory, they'd be elevated into regulation. So the minister consciously and deliberately leaves those things where Australian standards and other codes of practice and industry standards are developed, are good guidance for business, but they are not mandatory. So if you want any other questions on that or discussion, you might need to either call or email us or come to one of our safety leadership courses, which we run about every quarter. And so looking to next year now, we'll probably run one in February where we actually explain this in greater detail. So I just thought I'd help you out. The may and the must is whether you want to claim full compliance with a standard, but that doesn't mean to say you had to fully comply with that standard. Your circumstances may be totally different and you don't do that. So coming to the end, we're wishing you and everyone in your family and your colleagues a safe and happy holiday season. And thank you for joining us and for your support throughout 2024. And we look forward to seeing you in hopefully a brighter, even brighter 2025. And our next webinar will be on Friday, the 14th of February, if you want to jot that down. And Sarah Oliver of our admin team will send out a reminder as we lead into that webinar as well. So thank you once again, everyone. Sorry, Andrea and the team couldn't join me today. Very busy coming into Christmas, but we'll are thinking of all of our listeners, readers, and our clients and friends. And thank you once again. So all have a great, safe, happy Christmas. Thank you.